Welcome to the Book Binge. I am your host King Crusoe, but you can call me KC, and today's episode is another monthly reading wrap-up and TBR video with plenty to talk about, actually. January was overall, looking back at it, a pretty good month, but it was also pretty rough to start in certain ways. I feel like I got nothing done, but like I said, looking back, it seems like it was a little bit more successful than I'm kind of giving myself credit for. It's just a few more smaller books and stuff that I got done as opposed to larger projects, which, you know, kind of in its own way is pretty nice. So let's talk about some of those things in a little bit more specific. First off, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my desktop here just real quick to just show off what I started and what I ended the month with. So I started with The Demigod Files, Percy Jackson and the Olympians by Rick Riordan. So this is kind of like a extra sort of auxiliary piece, collecting a few short stories and stuff. The Demigod Files is pretty good. The handful of like interviews and other miscellaneous content in here is kind of either hit or miss or just doesn't really matter, but the main bulk of this little collection is 3 short stories specifically about Percy Jackson. But the 3 stories in this collection are pretty good. Standard Percy Jackson fare with rising stakes. You know, the first one has the least stakes of them all, and the third one has by far the most. The way that they meld into the narrative of the main series is also kind of hit or miss. The last one, it makes sense why it would never be referenced in the main series, although it actually has a pretty big element that appears in Heroes of Olympus later. It sets up something for the Heroes of Olympus, which is pretty entertaining. But generally speaking, these stories are kind of standalone. So I enjoyed the Demigod Files, didn't love it. The way that I ended the month was with Demigod Diaries, plus a short story, Percy Jackson and the Singer of Apollo, which isn't collected anywhere else. It's in a random anthology that I used to own once upon a time. No idea where that went. I think I might have got rid of it, so I have an ebook of it now. But these I read at the end of the month, the very end of the month. These are what wrapped up my reading. The Demigod Diaries, to be honest, is a little bit more of an interesting collection in my mind than the Demigod Files is. That's because it collects not just extra Percy Jackson stories. It has one Percy Jackson story in there, right? But it also has like the Diary of Luke Castellan. But this whole collection is technically meant to be read after the Heroes of Olympus, but I think you could read it after The Lost Hero, actually, and you'd be perfectly fine if you read it there. I'm pretty sure nothing spoils anything else in there because all of it is prior to that. So yeah, as long as you've read The Lost Hero, first book in the Heroes of Olympus, you can read the Demigod Diaries. Everything is fine in there. Percy Jackson and the Staff of Hermes is a pretty good story. It probably, in some sense, has higher stakes than any of the Percy Jackson stories in the Demigod Files. The other stories, like I said, the Diary of Luke Castellan is pretty good. Although Luke's voice isn't super distinct from many of Riordan's other narrators, which is unfortunate. There's also Leo Valdez and The Quest for Buford, which is pretty fun. That's the story that takes place after The Lost Hero. That's an entertaining story, although it does have some continuity errors in there, some continuity glitches that like don't actually make sense with the timeline of the series of the Heroes of Olympus. But I think the real shining spot of the Demigod Diaries is actually the last story, The Son of Magic, which is not written by Rick Riordan. It's written by his son, Haley Riordan. And that story is actually really good. I remember when I read the Demigod Diaries a long time ago, I was like, yeah, The Son of Magic is really good, maybe the best story in there. And I honestly stand by it. There's some weaknesses in there. There's some obvious kind of like issues with it, like very minor details that are just like, you can tell that like a 16-year-old wrote this as opposed to an adult. But there are also aspects of the story that are arguably more mature than anything Riordan's written, not least because the primary narrator of the story is an adult with a career, as opposed to all of Riordan's narrators in the Percy Jackson universe, which up to the end of Heroes of Olympus, all of the narrators have been like preteens or teenagers. So like, you know, that makes a big difference. But The Son of Magic is great. I think that Haley's writing in there is actually surprisingly good. And The Singer of Apollo is also a good story as far as the Percy Jackson short stories are concerned. But this one also has some minor continuity issues in there as well. There's just little specific details in there that just don't fully line up with everything from the series beyond, but like if you're willing to look past those details, the story's entertaining enough. So that is what I started and ended the month with. So I'm going to go ahead and close that now and talk about the actual books, the physical books that I read, because those I read on the Kindle. The physical books that I read over the course of the month were probably the biggest disappointment of the year so far, and probably in the running for one of the biggest disappointments of the year entire when we're at the end of it. That is The Aeneid by Virgil, translated by Robert Fagles, and I think this is primarily an issue with Robert Fagles. I did not like the voice of the narration very much. I never found the prose of it very beautiful or very interesting to read. It's just utilitarian to a fault. Like, the story is okay. In fact, like, there's some pretty high moments in here. Like, books 2 and 4 are great, 6 has some great stuff, 11 has some great stuff. There's great material in the Aeneid, but it's also bogged down by just a lot of pacing issues, not least because it's only 12 books instead of 24 like the Homeric epic poems are, and those 12 books are much longer, which makes them pretty sloggy by the time you get to the end of them. And also they're so long that like they end up being like 2 books worth of material smashed into one, and like somewhere around the middle they switch topics partway through, and it's like, okay, why was this not just split into 2 books each time? Like, so there's like structural and pacing issues that I felt like there were in here. And aside from the first handful of the books, the cantos, however you want to delineate the littler sections in the Aeneid, a handful of them are really good, but a lot of them are just long and, frankly, like I said, kind of boring, because Fagles' translation of this is not great. I know Fagles is popular when it comes to the Virgil and the Homer translations. Like, not my thing at all. Like, not even close. Just did not click for me. So the Aeneid is like fine, but has major issues, so I didn't particularly like it, which is probably going to be a hot take, especially since a couple of my friends think they like the Aeneid more than either the Iliad or Odyssey. So I think I need to reread the Aeneid at some point in the future with a different translation, and probably close after I do a reread of the Iliad and the Odyssey, just to kind of see. I don't know if that was just a me problem, or if it was just Fagles, or if it was the timing, or if it was some combination of all three. I have no idea. All I know is that I didn't love it. I loved a couple books, 2 and 4 particularly, were really good, but the rest of them were just kind of meh. Side note, book 2 in the Aeneid is actually the Trojan horse story, so if you think that happens in the Iliad, no, it doesn't. It happens in the Aeneid, so that's funny. The next book was Congo by Michael Crichton, the first book in this little triple collection I have here, and Congo was starting fantastic. The first third of it was like perfect. Really loved all of that stuff. It kind of started to drag little tiny bits in the second third, not to any notable or really concerning degree. The final act, however, like started to get bogged down a little bit too much with the science-y stuff, where the rest of the book didn't really have that much of a problem with that material. And the ending is a mess, not necessarily because the ending itself is bad, but because there is no ending, basically. To be fair, I would have liked to see the ending go a different direction than it went, but just going based off of where Crichton decided to take Congo's ending, it's just incomplete, is really what it comes down to, because you have the climax, and the climax is a little bit rushed, and then you have like the kind of escape scenario from the climax, and then all of a sudden you have like 3 paragraphs which just finish the book, and it's like, dude, this hasn't even finished yet. What are you doing? Why is this the end of the book? And then you have, after those 3 paragraphs, like a 1 to 2 page epilogue afterwards, which basically explains where all the characters end up afterwards. And I'm like, you could have expanded that final day of the expedition to actually make the rest of the getaway, the rest of the escape, have more substance in there. Could have explored some of that more, had it be tense and exciting. Would have definitely justified a little bit extra length. It's not like Congo's a long book. It's like 250 pages in this collection, which is a whole 50 pages shorter than Sphere, for example. So like, he had time to work with. Could have expanded this last day. Then he could have had an extra like 14th day tacked onto the end, which could have like actually been more or less an actual resolution, and said, or maybe not the resolution, but like the rest of the declining action, the falling action, however you want to describe that, just had all the characters like basically going over like what just happened and where they're going to go from there, making that move and having that be the ending, and then had like an entire section dedicated to the epilogue, rather than 1 to 2 pages telling where all the characters end up. Have like 1 to 2 pages for each character saying where they end up as sort of an epilogue section. I think that would have been a very good, easy 5-star book, but as the ending currently exists, it's just super rushed and just non-existent, and that's really disappointing after particularly the first third of the book is so good. Next up, I didn't finish We Who Wrestle with God. This is going to take several months to finish reading the book, but I have gotten at this point, at the time that I'm recording, through the end of part 3. So I finished part 2 and read all of part 3, and I think by the time this video goes up, I will have read part 4, because part 4 is only like 30 pages or something like that, so it'll be pretty easy to just kind of get through that little bit in that time. Really good. Part 3 is the best part of the book so far by a long shot. There have been a couple sections in there that have been really great, really fun to explore and kind of think about. So I'm continuing to enjoy We Have Wrestled with God, but that continues to be a long-term project. But other than that little bit of extra work done reading We Who Wrestle with God, I did get a decent bit of reading on Monster done. I finished Volume 5, that back half, and then also read Volumes 6 and 7. So I got through the Prague and the Imprisonment arcs, and the Prague arc in the back half of Volume 5, and basically the entirety of Volume 6 was splendid. It was fantastic. Really loved like everything about that. Super, super, super good. I understand why people really like volumes 5 and 6 now, like kind of compare them to the quality of volume 1, maybe even 9. I don't know about 9 yet because I've yet to read it, but really enjoyed that. The Imprisonment arc that took place in most of Volume 7, though, was really great for the most part, but there was also, like, kind of just a lot going on. By the time you get to the end of Volume 7, there's just so many things happening with, like, POV jumps and little bits of, like, time breaks and skipping back and, like, memories and stuff that, like, became confusing. It became a lot to digest. So once I finished Volume 7, I was like, I need a couple weeks off from this to just digest everything that happened. And truth be told, I still don't know if I've digested everything that happened, but I've been really enjoying Monster even still, and I'm coming pretty close to the end, and I think I will finish it pretty soon. I know I've been kind of rambling a lot about my reading this month. I'm sorry, I apologize about that, but Congo is my book of the month, just to kind of get it out there, even though the ending is pretty underwhelming and non-existent and thus disappointing, even though there's the aspect of the book itself that is disappointing in that way. Congo itself, like the first third of it, like I said, was perfect. Generally, the entire story was really good and interesting. Even though I would have liked to see the climax go a different direction, I could have abided the climax as is if the rest of it, if the falling action, if the resolution was expanded and actually kind of handled in an appropriate manner. You know, I'm a little disappointed by the ending, but the rest of it is just too good to say, like, yeah, this isn't my book of the month type of thing. And besides, what else am I going to say is my book of the month? The Aeneid, which I found to be supremely disappointing in basically every regard outside of books 2 and 4, or like the Demigod Diaries or Files or something, which are just short story collections, and like not even particularly great ones. Congo is kind of the de facto book of the month for January 2025, but to be fair, like I said, the first third of it is perfect, so I can't really fault that. However, if I was going to cheat a little bit for my book of the month, I would actually say that the arc of Monster, the end of Volume 5, the back half of Volume 5, and just about the entirety of Volume 6, in fact, all of Volume 6 in general, that little arc, the Prague arc, splendid, very good, like I said. So maybe that's my book of the month, actually. You know, depending on whether you want to call it Congo or this Prague arc of Monster, either one of those is an acceptable book of the month for January. But that means that we are heading into this month's reads, my TBR for February. Let's go ahead and pull the stack from over here. Try not to spoil the entire thing, but very much failing to do so. You definitely saw the top book of this. The main priority for February is A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan, Book 7 in the Wheel of Time, which I'm looking forward to reading. A friend of mine, Alistair, is going to be joining me more or less for the rest of my journey with the Wheel of Time, because he read the first 6 books quite a while ago, actually, and said that if I ever caught up to him, that he would join where he left off with me. So that is what is happening now with the Crown of Swords. Crown of Swords is one that I'm not sure how much I'm looking forward to it. I know there's a lot of people who say it's a little bit overhated. It's not like a bad book like some other people would be inclined to say. It's not part of the slog according to some people, but there are also some people who say like it's not as good as like the previous books. But you also have to remember that like I've kind of had unpopular opinions with this series, so who knows how I'm going to feel with the Crown of Swords. I certainly have no idea. The other main thing that I do want to get through, or I guess the next couple of main things, but my primary read aside from A Crown of Swords, a sort of secondary read, is Red Rabbit by Alex Grecian. This is more of a mood read for me. I know I kind of was going into 2025 wanting to do less mood reads, wanting to do this kind of like fitting in random books a little bit less often. That remains to be the case generally speaking, but for whatever reason, the last month or so, I've really hit a mood of like wanting to read something Western related, not least because I'm reading some of my personal family history regarding a family member who died relatively recently, and that family history alongside a desire to write something Western related and deciding to write something Western related in accordance to some of the stuff that I'm learning from the family history is a project that I've got on my mind right now. As such, I've been like, I kind of want to read a little bit Western, and for whatever reason, Red Rabbit just kind of, it seemed like the right time to read it. And ironically enough, the sequel to Red Rabbit actually comes out March 11th of this year. So reading this in February makes sense. A group of friends and I are deciding to just pick this up just kind of on a whim. The very first line of this book, the first line of the prologue, is a banger of a line. So I'm hoping that the mood and the vibe of this really works for me because I'm excited for it, and I do think I should enjoy it. Probably after I read Red Rabbit is going to be The Dead Zone by Stephen King, finally circling back to a little bit more Stephen King. Of course, I did read a couple of King's books last year in 2024, but those were a couple of his books under the pen name of Richard Bachman that I had technically already read before back in like 2020 or something like that. The Dead Zone will be my first brand new to me Stephen King book. Well, I guess I did read Night Shift in 2024 as well. I guess that's kind of unfair, but my first King novel. It's my first new King novel since I finished The Dark Tower back in July 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So it's been a few years practically, and definitely about 2.5 years since I've read an entire Stephen King book that wasn't just a short story collection that I hadn't read before. And I'm looking forward to continuing, man, for sure. Kind of the same way that I've been continuing Crichton relatively recent after a long hiatus. I want to get back into doing the same thing with King, and I'm going to be starting next with The Dead Zone, and I'm looking forward to that in February. Of course, I'm going to continue reading We Who Wrestle with God a little bit. Like I said, by the time this video comes out, I'll probably be done with part 4 of the book. I think I'll probably read part 5 over February. I don't think I'll have time to read any of part 6 because part 6 is a little bit lengthy. It's when the parts get a little bit lengthier in general. Considering some of the other reading plans that I have, I'm just going to stick with, hey, I should be through the end of part 5 by the end of February, so that is what I'm looking at. Finally, the other thing that I have planned more or less in the immediacy for the month is to actually finish off Monster with volumes 8 and 9, finish off these last couple of arcs, get through the actual climax of the book, finish it up. Book, I said. You know what I mean. Finished off this thing, and I'm really looking forward to that. I've really enjoyed a lot of Monster up to this point, so I have the urge to get back into that pretty soon. I believe by the time this video comes out, I'll probably have started volume 8, and if not, I'm starting volume 8 within the next couple of days. So yeah, that is basically the plans for February. The one thing that I have to note for if I have time, the sort of maybe read section here, I was originally going to say Eaters of the Dead by Michael Crichton because it's pretty short, but I don't think that that's actually going to be my maybe read, because my actual maybe read is going to be an arc that is actually kind of en route to me at the moment, at least at the time of recording. Boston Terran's The White Country, which again, kind of Western stuff. It seems to be the vibe right now because of kind of stuff that I'm working on, Red Rabbit and its sequel coming out in March. This book comes out on the exact same day as Red Rabbit's sequel does. I got an inquiry recently about doing an arc for this, and since it's less than 300 pages and kind of the concept sounds to be intriguing for sure, I'm looking forward to just reading something else that's sort of Western related, a different vibe. If you want to check out The White Country, it's by Boston Terran. This website here is bostonterran.com, spelt the same way. So definitely consider checking that out. But I am going to have my hands on it here relatively soon. Not 100% sure if I'm going to have this finished by the time it comes out, but I should have a video review up probably in April or May, I would guess, would be my best guess of when it's going to be done. Like I said, if I have time in February, I will read The White Country. If not, it'll probably be one of the books that I read in March. So that is the TBR for February of 2025. I'm looking forward to all of this stuff. So far, I've kept up with my 2025 schedule pretty well. In fact, I'm a little bit ahead on that, relatively speaking. continuing to follow along while throwing in a mood read for this month in Red Rabbit. Having the arc in there also throws a small wrench in things a little bit, technically speaking, but I have been enjoying my reading so far, surprisingly enough, despite me saying that I was pretty disappointed by a couple of the main things I read in January. I don't know, something about January is still working for me. The vibe of January is hitting right, and I'm looking forward to February as well. Let me know what you're reading, what you plan to read over the course of February, what you did read in March if you feel so inclined in the comments below. I'm grateful to you for checking out this video if you did, but for now, I've been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.